and make sure that we get those all down. So as we get started, like I said, this is the third webinar in a series of webinars about measuring the strength of partnerships. Oh, see if I can get here we go. Sorry about that. And all of these webinars have been around the topic of community weaving. And community weaving, like I said, is integrating environmental needs with community needs. It's a new way of looking at environmental education, and it's bigger than partnerships, collaborations, or networks. It's really about finding the alignment between environmental education and the mission of some of these other groups who might be working towards similar goals, but in very different ways. So we've been exploring this, and actually in March pulled a group together to talk about and think about what are the best practices around community weaving and what are the things that we should be doing and thinking about, and how can we integrate this more into our work. And that group discussion through a panel came up with 4 big practices for successful community weaving partnerships. And those were creating organizational value for partnerships and making sure that the whole organization, not just one person, one champion, really values that partnership and the outcomes it can produce. Seeking reciprocity and making sure that organizations are both giving and receiving benefits from the partnership, even if those benefits are different, that they're both benefiting from it. Defining a shared vision and making sure that the outcomes that you're working towards really advance the needs and the visions of all the partners involved. And building consensus and making sure that you are collaboratively decision-making, actively listening, and including all partners in your work. So those were the 4 kind of overarching practices that really came out of that community weaving panel. As we've progressed, our second webinar was actually around youth voice and how do we work with youth as partners. And we talked a lot about where can you find new partners, what organizations can you explore partnership with, whether they be sports and recreation, health providers, food and agriculture, faith-based organizations, arts and culture organizations, public safety, financial organizations. They might be in places that you might not have thought to partner with before, but how can we start thinking about where we might have some shared needs? And here's an example, just a great example of community weaving that's happening through Live Well. And Live Well is an organization that's really working towards healthy living and active living goals. And you can see the number of organizations that are all connected and supporting these common goals of healthy eating and active living. And to the right on your screen, you'll notice there's quite a few different environmental or environmental education organizations that are involved in this greater community goal in different ways, either by providing education and youth activities or by gardens and producing food and those sorts of things. So great example of community weaving in action. So today, as we move this conversation forward, once you've established this partnership, or as you establish this partnership, we want to think about how do we measure if it's effective? How do we know if we're using best practices, and how can we look at that and make sure that the strength of the partnership is as important as the outcomes of that partnership? So we have Anna Soler here with us today, which I'm so excited about. Anna is a facilitator, trainer, and project manager with Civic Canopy. And Civic Canopy is an organization that works to connect diverse groups of people who are seeking change in their communities and equips them with the tools to solve problems and create meaningful and lasting impact. So this is right up Anna's alley and her expertise in thinking about the strength of partnerships. Anna has been involved in a number of initiatives, including convening and facilitating the 9 to 25 initiative, which is a partnership between youth and adults for positive youth development. She's also been the director of Front Range Earth Force, worked with Denver Partners Urban Peak, and the Denver District Attorney's Juvenile Diversion Program, as well as was a founding part of the founding team for the Victim Support Network. So Anna comes with a tremendous amount of expertise and a personal connection to environmental education, and we are so happy to have her here today. So with that, I will turn it over to Anna to take over from here.
Thank you, Katie. Thanks for that awesome introduction of the work that you all are doing. And definitely your 4 best practices sound amazing. And the organization value and the reciprocity, I think, fits right into what we're talking about today. And I love all the people's faces as well on that banner. That was awesome. So as Katie said, I'm the Director of Youth Engagement at the Civic Canopy. And I wanted to say a few things about the Civic Canopy because it's such an amazing place for this type of work, and our mission and vision feeds directly to how we work with these types of contracts. So the vision of the Canopy, if you don't mind going to the next slide, Katie. The vision of the Canopy is the many working as one for the good of all. The mission is to create a culture of collaboration that drives transformative change. So the area that I work in primarily is with youth systems, but our entire team facilitates and strengthens many different types of networks. With Colorado 9 to 25, we are focusing on helping young people reach their full potential by ensuring that different services are aligned, that systems are changing to meet the needs, and that all young people between 9 and 25 are safe, healthy, educated, connected, and contributing. But there are other buckets under the canopy as well. So we work with early childhood, healthy eating, very familiar with Live Well, civic engagement, and after-school partnership. I'm very excited because we're fortunate that through the canopy, we have a model for this work. And Katie, if you don't mind going to the next slide. Actually, go one more, because that's kind of there we go. Ooh, fancy, the circle's turned. So there you see our purpose and vision and mission. And then we have this 3-platform approach, which are the 3 circles at the bottom, where we're moving towards providing training and technical assistance, building a shared technology platform, and diving into the arena of advocacy engagement, all of that in the near future. But the circle above those 3 is our culture of collaboration model. In this model, we employ it when we're looking at how we develop contracts and how we design the process of meetings. And you can see in there, there's learn at the top on the left, and then we move to include, dialogue, act, and results. This model contributes to where we want to go, and I would say that all of our work is really based on relationships. And with this webinar today, I'm going to start at a very foundational level and look at brain development. Kind of surprising at a webinar about evaluation, but it makes sense due to the way we're wired in our brains that the quality of the process hinges on that. And then we'll build up from there and look at the strength of a collaborative and how some researchers, local researchers as well, are measuring what makes for a successful team. And the assumption is that if you have a successful, well-functioning, really bought-in team, you're going to get to those outcomes. And then we'll look at how is it that you build that team, and then look at different evaluations that I've worked with through these networks and share a couple of tools for you all to explore on your own time, because there is a lot of good stuff out there. So next slide, please. Okay, diving right into it. I hope that you have heard of SCARF, and if you haven't, I think you're going to love it. And this was developed by David Rock in 2008. And SCARF is actually an acronym. We can add one more acronym to our nonprofit world. And it stands for those 5 words that are bolded or in bold font. Status is about relative importance to others. And what David Rock is putting forward is that these 5 conditions or these 5 features of how your brain works really determines the success of a group dynamic. And he talks about it as far as managing groups, managing people, moving, change, all of those situations can use something like this. It's about the quality of the process, and it's taking into account where everybody is when they are entering a group. So the first one is status, and it's about relative importance to others. And it's about our worth, like how do we fit into this hierarchy? How do we fit into this collaborative? And individuals, if they feel like their status is threatened in any way, your brain reacts to that threat. It's also good to think about that when you're with a group or forming a group and other people are maybe having a difficult time plugging in. Is the environment of the group open to people feeling like, okay, I know how I fit in here and I know that I'm valued? Then certainty is another factor here, and it is really important. It's about being able to predict the future, and I would venture to guess that most people like to have some clarity and certainty. And if a situation is unfamiliar, it causes more stress. In familiar situations, a person's brain uses fewer resources than unfamiliar ones. And if people aren't clear about where your collaborative is moving, what their role is, their ability to make good decisions, then that adds stress to the brain. And that's probably energy that could be better spent on contributing to the outcomes of your collaborative. Autonomy provides a sense of control over events. It's amazing looking at studies about workplace behavior. Many times people would rather be rewarded with more autonomy than a monetary raise. If the brain senses that you're not able to do what you feel needs to be done in a certain situation, then that adds stress. So it is about the ability to motivate people with that added autonomy, that they're not just following a script or following a routine. Relatedness. This is a sense of safety with others. And if you think back to a collaborative or a group that you've really enjoyed and has been successful, then that goes back to the fact that we're social people, we're social animals, and we benefit from being in a situation where we're connected with others. And of course, that looks different for different people, looking at extroverted and introverted and everything else, but that relatedness is still there. And then finally, the fairness factor. And this is about if a person thinks something is unfair, then the brain automatically goes into defense mode. Removing that sense of unfairness makes a huge difference. So that's why the art and science of when to include people in making decisions is really critical. If people feel like they're being asked for input or asked to make a decision when it's actually already made, when the decision's already been made, then there's a perception that this isn't fair, and then it kind of flows backwards, back up to the other 4 issues that we talked about with the SCARF theory. So it's a very powerful kind of theory, and there's a lot on the internet about the science and the chemistry and what parts of your brain are affected. But it helps, even talking about this in your collaborative or in your group, helps people understand where other people are coming from. Definitely in conflict or high stress meetings or decision-making times, I've used this to kind of set the stage and say, you know, we're all human. Here's some ways that your brain might be reacting to this situation. And it allows everybody to start with a greater sense of humanity or on the same level playing field. So I just wanted to dive in a little bit because I find it super interesting, that fairness piece. And Katie, if you don't mind clicking forward to the next slide. So Eisenberger out of UCLA, she did a study using a game called Cyberball. So learnings from Cyberball. And what she did is she asked people to play a video game where they were playing catch with two other avatars on the screen. After a while of playing catch with the avatars on the screen, the other avatars quit throwing to you or to the person who was in the research study. And she had measured the stimulus or the activity in the brain when that happened. And the result was that the reaction of the brain was similar to the result when one feels physical pain. So in other words, the feeling of being rejected provoked the same reaction that pain would cause. It just really highlighted, wow, the brain really works as a social system. That feeling of connectedness, that feeling of fairness is really huge. And looks like we have two number ones, which means that they're just super important points. And people in a collaborative have to feel secure to work well and to function well. Okay, so why are we talking about this? Just to say again, this goes back to how we involve stakeholders. When you're forming a new group in your current collaborative, or you're thinking of forming a collaborative, think about how it might feel to even receive that invitation. The person you're inviting to be a part of it or to start a new committee might think, how will my organization be impacted? How will my community be impacted? What difference can I make? What's expected of me? So these are the types of questions that are good to deal with when you're managing people or running an organization, facilitating a group, or starting a collaborative. Going from how the brain works and laying that down as kind of a complete foundational building block to moving on, let's look at what we're talking about. And Katie, if you don't mind moving to the next slide. Just to be open about this little point, and that is, are we talking about collaboration or coordination, or collective impact for that matter? I think when collective impact term became very popular in 2011 or 2010 or so, I felt that everybody was moving towards collective impact. And not everything needs a collective impact. And it's okay if it's just coordination, if it's a cooperation, and definitely if it's collaboration. So Chris Lipp and Larson from 1994 put out this definition of collaboration, or this statement, that it's to create a shared vision and joint strategies to address concerns that go beyond the purview of any particular party. So that definitely goes back to what Katie was talking about with the shared vision and building that movement and reciprocity. So for example, we recently worked with a group of organizations working on green infrastructure in a neighborhood. And they came around, they approached us, I should say, because they wanted to align all of the plans that were present in that neighborhood. And their idea was, we want to align these plans because there's just a ton going on and not everybody knows what all these other organizations are doing. And then we also want to move towards collective impact and develop some indicators and figure out how we were going to measure our results. So we established a strong action team, which was the greater group, and then a smaller core team that met in between those meetings to organize and to get ready. They created a shared vision. We took a look at all the plans. There was over 30 plans for this neighborhood from different levels of government and community. And then we started looking at the indicators and the results and realized, you know, we're not quite there, we want to focus on these plans and then come back to data and indicators at a later date. And I think that was a really healthy decision. And in speaking to healthy collaboratives across the country, many times people are in this formative stage for up to 6 years, 7 years. And so taking the time to really figure out, have we moved the level of collaboration or collective impact, or are we just where we need to be? Next slide, please. All right, so the research that we have out there and some features of highly successful collaboratives come from a local researcher named Darren Hicks, who has quite a few other researchers in on this article at the bottom of the screen, The Influence of Collaboration on Program Outcomes, the Colorado Nurse Family Partnership. And he has really boiled down a lot of research. It's worth reading that article for sure. And has come up with 2 indicators of a successful collaborative. And number 1 is strong process leadership. And number 2 is an open and credible process. The strong process leadership is about bringing appropriate people to the table and keeping them there through difficult periods, because there will be difficult periods. And the key is facilitating all of your diverse points of view in a manner that represents and respects differences, but yet all the stakeholders feel like they can stay competent and trusted and valued throughout the process. Most people come to the table with an agenda from their organization, and the balance here is ensuring that they will get and be able to give something that will benefit their organization or their community and the greater good. The second piece is the open and credible process. And this again goes back to SCARF. People need to perceive that they are all treated equally, and of course, not just perceive, but actually be treated equally, and secure that decisions have not been made in advance, with the process simply serving as a legitimation for those decisions. They actually see the process as more fair, even if the outcome is different than what they wanted, if they have an opportunity to influence the process before decisions are made. So often it's not about winning their point or defending their stance, but it's more that the entire process was very transparent, that voices were included at appropriate times, that questions when they were asked were given weight the same as anybody else, regardless of status around the table. I wish we could have time for some questions. Let me just see if there's any questions. I don't see any on the chat, but feel free to jump in at any point if you have questions about what we're talking about. And again, that is from Darren Hicks, who is actually at the University of Denver. So how do we begin to develop those groups so that we can have that highly successful collaborative? And Katie, if you don't mind moving to the next slide. Engagement and recruitment. And this, in my experience, is happening all the time in a collaboration. It's not a one-time thing by any means. And it's important that it's done in a way that is super thoughtful and intentional. And I'd like to go back to the same example I talked about before with the group that was doing a plan alignment and thought they would move towards collective impact, and in the end decided that it wasn't the right time. But that group began with this new work by doing something that we call discovery. And that discovery process identified, X number, 8 to 10, 12 to 15, different stakeholders that should be consulted and looked at for wisdom in building the group and learning about the context of the situation. But what we did in this process was that in addition to asking those questions, like what would you like to see happen out of this collaboration or collective impact, What's important to you? What do we need to know? In addition to those kind of very basic open-ended questions, we also got a sense for who might be interested at different levels of the structure that was being designed for this collaboration. So the core group came together as a smaller subset, but the door was open for other people to join. Their role was mostly to plan in between meetings, and they were very intent on doing a lot of the thought and research and moving the ball forward in between the larger action team meetings. But they remained open to people joining the core, mostly at the beginning. But that feeling like this is an open group, come join us, was always there. And it was safe to say that after the first 1 or 2 meetings, it did not expand, but it expanded nicely before then. And then the action team was a larger group. It also remained open throughout the process and had a very welcoming feel. People appreciated all the work that the core group did to make sure that work was moving forward. And there was representation from nonprofits, government, community, universities, businesses. And this group was focused on green infrastructure. But the diversity that they had at the table at both the core group and the action team meeting was really inspirational. They managed to bring in the work that was happening at the community level, the work that was happening at the university level, to kind of the more usual partners at the table, which would be community, government, and the businesses in the neighborhood. The final group is community. And this is where this group also really shined. You can imagine with the number of plans, as I mentioned earlier, in this neighborhood, there was over 30, that there had been a lot of engagement of the community. And they had been asked over and over, how would you like to see this neighborhood transformed? Tell us what your vision is for an amazing neighborhood. Tell us what your concerns are. When it came time to form this part of their work, they were very clear that they were not going to reach out to community in a kind of open-ended, come one, come all manner. Because of that reason, they felt like they had been asked a lot and that they needed to see action on the previous input that had been supplied through all the development of the plans. So we had 1 or 2 representatives. One came occasionally to the core group, but there was always community representation by 1 or 2 people on the action team. And when we did the discovery process for this group, everybody that we talked to said, oh, we need to make sure and engage the community. And then we would explain that is super important, but at this point in the process, we're not doing the come one, come all. It's very concerted, very thoughtful engagement. And I think by having those discovery interviews, we all got on the same page with what community was going to look like in this phase of the project and who would be attending. Now, when we finished that phase of the project, then the group felt like, okay, we've done this work. We've aligned the plans. We're moving forward with, X, Y, and Z plans. We do need to go back now and engage the community and see kind of where they're at with the work that's been happening. Okay, if we move to the next slide. Okay, measuring effective partnership. So if we go back, we've paid attention to SCARF as a way to be aware of how people react in a group and how people may feel threatened or may feel super comfortable depending on what's happening. We then looked at what Darren Hicks, Chris Slip, a bunch of other folks have been talking about with collaborations and what is successful. So building on all of that, we've been moving this collaborative, it's been moving forward. We're going to go back to the Canopy community learning model and say, okay, we need to learn. If we're going to keep these groups focused on their ultimate actionable outcomes, we need to take a step back. And if you want to call it learn from the community leadership model, or you want to call it continuous quality improvement, there has to be this evaluation happening on a regular basis. Hold on one second, I'm just gonna take a little sip of water. Okay, so working with a large collaborative that had been moving, trucking forward for about a year and a half, we realized it was time to do a deeper dive. So this particular collaborative had probably about 10 different action teams who were working on different actionable items, some more actionable than others. So some of the products included youth engagement standards, a youth bill of rights, kind of a meaty skeleton of what a youth endorsement system might look like. We were looking at what training and technical assistance could look like across the state. And then it kind of hit like a bump in the road. And we started hearing like from the action teams, we need more information. We're not sure when we can make a decision or who's needed to make that decision, etc. So the backbone organization, the Canopy, was approached by a master's level student who said, I want to do my capstone on this collaborative, Colorado 925. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. And just see what's happening. And I was like, yes, please, love to have a third party do this check-in midway to where we were. It's hard to say it was midway, but it was a substantial amount of time into the work. And she put together some amazing interviews, also a survey, and let the leadership team know that, hey, the action teams need more clarity on how to make decisions, who to involve with making decisions. There's a lot of people doing this work on top of their 40-hour plus week job. And just a lot of like, okay, we need to slow down. We're kind of missing out on some of these core group issues. Then, this is amazing, the leadership group for Colorado 9025 listened to the feedback and said, okay, let's take a deeper dive. And dove into an internal process. And Katie, if you don't mind moving to the next slide. Yes. Okay. So they did what they called an action team commitment assessment. And they put together some pretty amazing set of questions on everything about people's involvement and their ability to commit to the work. So this is a very qualitative evaluation step here, but it was a real stepping back from the work, responding to what was simmering among the groups, and then listening harder. So it was about 14 questions, and they asked about the commitment, and then they asked about the balance and what was difficult, what was working. Communication turned out to be a key factor. Basically, people were struggling with what is it that we're achieving. And that didn't mean just concrete achievements, but the bigger picture of the large vision of Colorado 9 to 25, with its major goal of having every young person between 9 and 25 be safe, healthy, educated, connected, and contributing in the state of Colorado. So how are we moving there? How does having these things accomplished move us toward those outcomes? How can I contribute was also a big piece. With the vision that large, and CAE, and I'm assuming many of you on the call, your collaboratives are huge. And people need to know that the needle is moving that way. And then finally, the decision-making process and inclusion. So some of the quotes were, we want more transparency. I'd love to know how decisions are being made. I don't hear about that. And the call to action was very clear. And one of those was understanding how it was that people were balancing their work with the work of the collaborative or the collective impact. We found out that many people on this 9 to 25 collective impact were doing Colorado 9 to 25 on top of everything else. So if they went to a 2-hour meeting, it meant they stayed later at work. So that's been a major kind of rewrite as we move forward to ensure that if Anna from an organization is involved, that her supervisors know and that the organization knows so that the work can be built into job descriptions. And that's also going to make it more sustainable. They also asked for how to partner to ensure that their organizations were also on board with the mission and vision. So the next slide, please. Okay. Actually, before I mention these evaluation tools, I wanted to say a few things about what's happened with 9 to 25 as we're moving forward. So the leadership team has spent several months diving into the work of the action teams and looking at where it was that these action teams were going and what was needed to move us forward based on the action plan. It also came time to go back to that recruitment and listening to who we already had on the collaborative and what we needed. So that resulted in a survey, kind of a skills inventory of all the members of 9 to 25, and then gaps analysis for who are we missing on many different levels, from geographic to spheres of influence to passions for the various outcomes. Then a lot of the struggles that came out in the commitment assessment were woven into the recruitment and to the interview process. So talking about, okay, if you join this collaborative, how does that work with your current job and things like that. Okay, so there's a lot more to say around the evaluation based on the building blocks of inclusion that I've talked about in this webinar, and there's some great organizations out there doing implementation science, measuring outcomes, measuring process quality, etc. And these are two tools that many people might be familiar with, but the high quality process tool, Larson and Hicks, and the Wilder Collaboration Index. I'm not hugely familiar with those, but definitely hear folks on staff suggesting that I just share those tools as a fun place to go post-webinar. Next slide, please. So I wanted to let folks know that we do have a summit coming up in November, and evaluation is a key topic over the course of the 2.5 days. Karen Pittman from the Forum for Youth Investment, I believe, will be there, as well as Tamarack Institute out of Canada, who does, they're actually co-sponsors, who does amazing work around collective impact and reducing poverty throughout Canada. So that's another amazing website. And at this point, I'd like to open it up for questions and shared discussion, because I know that there's a lot to learn from each one of you on this webinar. So we'd love to hear some thoughts or some questions.
You can either tap or type your questions into the chat, or you can raise your hand by going to your name on the participant list, and we can unmute you from there. So while people are typing, Anna, I'll ask, how Do you have any suggestions or tips for evaluating small partnerships where maybe there's a few players involved, or kind of informal ways that you can evaluate the strength of partnerships?
Yeah. I think we work with a fair amount of smaller partnerships, and in weaving in that learning part of our community learning model, we actually have been, for the past year or so, being very intentional about asking at the end of major meetings directly, is this what you were hoping for? Is the collaborative moving forward in the way that you want it to? Did you feel like things were clear in this meeting? Do you know what your role is in this meeting? And we actually do a survey with some of our smaller groups after every monthly meeting just to check in. And as we know, there's different ways that people like to communicate, and it's not always in a large group. So we compile the results of the meeting evaluation and the process evaluation, distribute it to everybody on the team, and then use it in planning the next agenda. Another quick, fun, easy way, and this is probably more direct and immediate feedback, is to do something just called plus delta. And you basically ask the group for, what did you like about this meeting? What do you like about the process so far? And what do you feel like needs to be changed? So whether it's the way that the agenda was set up, how people were included in the creation of the agenda items, whatever it may be. But having that instant, okay, we're going to take the last 3 minutes, you can just popcorn out your immediate thoughts is super helpful. And then the evaluation helps people respond more, less audio or less immediate, but on their own time.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. It's definitely impacted the flow. I think we often tend to schedule too much into one meeting, and then people feel frustrated that not enough was accomplished. So this is tempered and made our meetings more realistic, and therefore the work of the collaborative more realistic. And also probably generated more meetings.
Awesome. I have one more question. I haven't seen any pop up yet.
Okay.
But how have you seen people use evaluation of partnership or evaluating process as part of grant applications and looking for funding? And how can we kind of leverage some of this type of evaluation in the bigger process?
That is a great question. And off the top of my head, though I'd like to give that some more thought as well, is as far as process, we're moving towards having more what folks are calling end user involvement and more funder involvement. So we've started using a project management tool called MOCA. And you can just Google that, MOCHA. I forget exactly who created it, but it's an acronym. So the M is the maestro, the O is the owner, C is consultant, H is helper, A is approver. And so when we first start on a collaborative or on a collective impact, we do a lot of identifying roles and ensuring that there's role clarity. And that consultant one is super cool because if you're working on a long-term or short-term collaborative, you usually forget to include all these really cool diverse perspectives because you're just so focused on getting it done, and you know who you want there, and you know to ask them who they want there. But if you think about, okay, well, who are the consultants that could jump in and give feedback and do a process evaluation, you end up with researchers, actual funders, the end users, whether it's youth or teachers or whoever it may be. You really start to think outside the box when the process is fresh. So that has been really cool. So then you schedule those check-ins with the consultants regularly during the year so that you can just have that kind of advisory board feeling of, here we are, this is what we've accomplished, this is what we're struggling with, whose voices are we missing? And you hear from people who are a little bit more distant and not so into the day-to-day or week-to-week of the work. So that's been a lot of fun, and it's definitely helped, I think, improve that inclusiveness piece of our community learning model.
Great.
Excellent.
Awesome. Well, I haven't seen any more questions pop up. Hillary did post in the chat, if you're interested, a template for that plus delta activity.
Oh, cool. Thanks, Hillary.
And we did record this webinar, so we will send it out in a couple of days with some of these resources as well. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and huge thank you to Anna for sharing your expertise around this topic. And I think it's so important for us to think about the process and how we're evaluating our partnerships along the way, as well as the outcomes that we achieve. So this is super helpful. Do you have any closing thoughts before we close up, Anna?
I would just, say thank you to you for this opportunity. And it is a huge challenge, but getting that feedback on a regular basis through these tools is really amazing. And it just makes it all more transparent and I think high quality. So just thanks for the opportunity to do this. And thank you all for taking an hour out of your busy day to participate as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your afternoon. And hopefully we will see you soon. Expect an email from us in just a couple of days.
Thank you.